Hi, and welcome to the Real Heart and Soul podcast. I'm here today with the one and only Dave Hollis. Dave, for people who don't know you, and I think there'll probably be a few people in my audience, who are you and how would you introduce yourself to people?
Well, I'm the father of 4 kids. I'll start there. I have a 13, 12, 8, and 3-year-old quartet of human beings that live here with me in Austin, Texas. I'm an author, a podcaster, a speaker. I'm a Christian human being that believes in God. I'm a whole host of things. I'm a runner, but really I'm doing my best to try and figure out how to take the things that have been afforded to me gifts-wise, bring them to the world in a way that maybe affords some light in a world that desperately needs light, and do that in just as many different ways as I possibly can in trying to put words on pages or speak in the format like a podcast, and try to be encouraging, try to be real. I am human like anyone who's listening, which means that I am struggling just like anyone who's listening. And yet in the struggle, that's where growth can be found. And so I am in real time on a perpetual attempt to every single day just become a little bit better than who I have been before, learn a little bit more about life and what it takes to thrive inside of this space that we are inhabiting. And in sharing my experiences, hope that it creates an empathy bridge with anyone who might listen or read the things that I create to normalize some of what they're experiencing and hopefully help them have a trail of breadcrumbs if they find themselves stuck on the same stuff that I've been stuck on, to get out of their own way and get on with their life.
Do you think you're an inspiration, and do you try and be an inspiration, or do you think that just comes as part of who you are? Because I think you're
Yeah, well, I appreciate, it's like, I hope that I can be inspiring, but there are certainly days, especially inside of a year like 2020, where inspiring isn't necessarily the goal as much as maybe connecting to people through the reality of what it means to be human and how we are each working through the things that we are working through. I think that hopefully there's going to be something that comes in the things that I create that are in fact inspiring or help someone maybe think a little bit differently. They may not end up seeing it my way, but maybe there's a provocative enough nature in the way that I brought something up that has them now thinking differently in a way that creates breakthrough, that maybe affords them some just small seed that they can plant that maybe grows into something bigger over time because of having been challenged to think in a little bit of a different way.
What did you want to be when you grew up? Because did you start in the, I know, big question, right? Like go back away. Because what I'm doing now in my job, I never imagined that I'd be doing what I'm doing. So I'm a corrective exercise coach. I'm a CHEK practitioner, which means I look at the body from a holistic perspective in terms of physical movement. So I coach people in the physical things. I like watching your workouts as well. They're very funny. But also I do the holistic lifestyle coaching side of things as well. So I look at people, I assess people's emotional, mental, spiritual place where they're at and help coach them through that. In high school, I was the last in all of like athletics and running, and I did everything I could to avoid getting out of exercise. And yet here I am as a corrective exercise coach and loving my life. But so when you were growing up, did you have a thought process of where you might end up? And is that the same place that you started?
Well, interestingly, when I was young, I wanted to be some combination of Rather Tom Brokaw, like the news broadcasters in America. I'm not sure what the equivalent might be in Australia, but someone who up on camera represented what was happening inside of the world of current events. Or Vin Scully was the very famous broadcaster for the Los Angeles Dodgers. I grew up in LA. I wanted to be a sportscaster. So some combination of using the gifts that I have with speaking to inform people, entertain people, something like that. And so as much as I had a career for 25 plus years inside of entertainment, I maybe tapped into some of those skills and how I might have led a meeting or represented the strength of our movie slate to a big audience of people. I actually think I find myself closer to the thing that I hoped to be when I was a kid today, because I have such an unconventional kind of job in this weird world of social media and what it means to have a podcast, and how talking in an Instagram live or sharing something through a book is a form of reporting. It's a form of entertaining. It's a form of sharing and consolidating stories or reducing stories to something that maybe can be received by the audience that you'd hope. And so I don't know, like, I think my exploits with my son and his Little League baseball is a long audition for the possibility that one day I will be doing play-by-play for some baseball organization. The Instagram lives or the coaching that I might do is maybe a long audition for potentially one day being on a news broadcast of some sorts. But I feel like in a weird way, I'm kind of doing the thing that I thought I would do. It's just not the way that I thought I would do it.
Yeah, that's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Better than you possibly thought it could be?
Better, harder, it's a mix, right? I mean, I lived inside of some very traditional corporate structures for a very, very long period of time.
You should say
What's that?
You should say that you worked for Disney for how long?
Yep, I worked for Disney for 17 years. Before that, worked in grassroots marketing at a talent agency. I worked at 20th Century Fox before that. I've had jobs in PR, research. I managed Destiny's Child back when they were just launching their first album as a part of a mall tour. I mean, I've had a string of crazy jobs, but most of my jobs required that I put on a suit and tie, show up at an office, lead big teams, and work in my case, fortunately, for just the biggest and best company on the planet, in the Walt Disney Company, taking the greatest intellectual property created by the greatest storytellers, and how do you make that really come to life inside of movie theaters? That was the thing I did for a long, long time. That job, those roles, every single thing that happened inside of traditional entertainment were just a complete departure from what the last 2.5, 3 years of my life has looked like. And that's great. I mean, it's not, I should say never. I'm going to go through my closet at one point and get rid of these suits because they don't have a place in my life necessarily. There's not that many weddings that I could attend. But I love the thing that I get to do today. It's so unconventional. It's also really weird to try and explain to somebody. Yeah. What do you do, Dave? Yeah, I know it's weird, but I love doing it. And I love the way that it exploits the kind of gifts that I have been afforded in a way that only the kind of job that I have can.
Were you always a good talker? Like, were you always like, I know I've heard the story that you say about your valedictorian speech that you never got to give, which is I think a pivotal point. Would you agree that was a pivotal point in your growth?
So, I mean, it's one of many. I believe me, I have made more mistakes than we could spend days on a podcast just talking about the mistakes that I have made. It was a great learning, but pretty early on, I recognized that, hey, I've been given this gift of gab. I have this ability to think pretty quickly and able to, in a way that maybe other people can't, take a bunch of cues from a room, understand the kind of conversation that people are potentially interested in, be somewhat of a shapeshifter inside of that space and serve an audience the kind of message that they are hoping for. It's a strength and a weakness, by the way, but when I was running the sales organization at Disney, it was a great strength because there were plenty of times when I would run into someone who had an opinion about a position that we'd taken on our negotiating terms, and understanding how they were walking into the room thinking one thing allowed me to take some of this gift that I have for speaking specifically to the needs of a stakeholder who's sitting in potentially opposition of my point of view and help them feel a little more comfortable about what they think. The downside to some of this strength is that there are times when my ability to become what a room needs or what a relationship needs compromises the possibility of intimacy, because I can create what I believe somebody wants in a way that sometimes can tip into codependency and turn an authentic representation of myself into a version of who I think they need at the expense of someone actually getting to know me and getting to know the real me.
Yeah, that must be like, I know that's a fine line that I balance with as well, in terms of how much of yourself you're able to give, and to who as well, and how much does it compromise your soul to change that atmosphere or to give that person in the room that what they need, and how much, or how do you protect yourself from giving too much of yourself?
Well, Interestingly, I think there's a lot of weight that we afford to the worry of there being a line that we can cross, because rarely, I mean, very rarely, have I found that being the most authentic, most transparent version of myself ended up boomeranging back at me. I mean, for the most part, it actually availed my humanity to the people I was in the midst of a conversation with in a way that had them seeing themselves in me. And when you can connect through an empathy bridge that you create by showing, hey, I'm also processing this, working through this, struggling with this, having to think through these things because I do not yet, like you do not yet, have it all together, it actually humanizes you and makes you someone that people think, oh, okay, I guess he's a little more like me than he is different from me. If we are more like than different, then maybe we can find some way of meeting in the middle on this thing that we maybe are in, contradiction of or in conflict over. And so I rarely, I guess what I used to believe, oh man, don't let them see you sweat and make sure that you put on the airs of everything being great. Thank you very much. I've gone so far to the other side now in the way that I've written in books and the way that I've talked on social. If someone chooses that, man, this is not for me because of me representing a super authentic and transparent version of myself, that's not a me problem. Yeah. That is a them problem. And I don't even feel bad about it for them, because that just means they need a different teacher. They need a different coach. They need somebody else in their life. And man, there are so many options available. If you would prefer to have someone who isn't as honest or has it more together potentially than I do, that's fine. Go with God. I hope you find that person.
We're not everybody. We can't be everybody we can't be everything to everybody.
No, not at all. And I think the reality too is in a world where I'm trying to really zero in on, all right, so like what of the ways that I could use the strengths that I have would be the best ways to exploit the passions of my life and the calling of my life. And that doesn't mean a utilitarian, all things for all people kind of approach. It means a very specific, what is it about me and how I was uniquely created that might bring these gifts of mine to the world in a way that can maximize me as a light bearer, me as a person of impact, me as a person who might be able to affect the way that somebody thinks. I am just me. And so if my way of approaching this works for some people, fantastic. Those are the people that the message is for. But if it doesn't work for other people, it's just not for them. I'm not free ice cream. There's no way that I could possibly expect to make every single person happy. And anyone who's listening who thinks that they have the ability to make everybody happy, you just don't. So don't even try. Really own who you are and know that your people will find you. And those that don't want you, like you, need you, they weren't your people.
What's the first thing that you did earlier this year when you realized that you were going to be going through a really hard season? And I'm talking about the announcement, which obviously happened long after the decision was made for you and Rachel to separate. What's the first thing that you did for you after that you knew you really needed to do to ground yourself and to absorb the information?
Well, I have long been an advocate of therapy, but the first thing I did in the aftermath of, hey, your primary identity that you've had for a long time, we were married for 16 years, together for 18, I was her husband. And so the idea that was going to change was challenging to the core of my identity. And so I really went on this adventure for understanding self. So I found a therapist that was a new therapist who happened to specialize in something called family systems therapy, I think it's called. But anyway, the idea of self, right? And I spent unbelievable amounts of time really digging into understanding who I am and understanding the roles that the different parts of me play relative to myself. Which it maybe sounds a little esoteric and elevated, but the idea was that I am the sun. Stick with me for a second. And the parts that exist inside of my being are clouds, all of which play roles. And sometimes a cloud could be a feeling like anxiety. It could be a coping mechanism. It could be a whole host of things. And when we lose ourselves, when we are struggling, especially in the midst of identity change, those clouds are so present that sometimes we forget that the sun exists.
Yeah.
And so the work I was doing was to try and create a relationship with all of these feelings that I was feeling for the first time in my entire life, so that I could make sense of what I was thinking and what I was feeling and what roles these parts were playing, so that I didn't demonize those parts for existing, but that I might create a relationship with those parts to understand what roles they thought they were actually playing in my life. So that I, in understanding those roles, could solidify a relationship with self, me, in the absence of some of the things that I previously associated with who I was. And it has been, I'll tell you, it has been unbelievable work. I mean, the book that I always, jump to in conjunction with the conversation around the kind of therapy I was doing is this book called Untethered Soul, which has been around forever and ever. But it's just this book and this therapy, the idea that I am not these thoughts, I am not these emotions, I am the witness to these thoughts, I am the witness to these emotions, and I have a job to understand why these thoughts are present or why these feelings are present, and understand the roles I think that they're playing. So, that was the first big thing. The second thing, there is a massive connection for me between physical activity and mental and emotional health. And so I started running like a crazy person.
I was going to ask you about that, because I know that's always has been, from what I've seen, a long time part of your mental health plan is to exercise.
Yeah. The big question I asked right around the time that I was, processing this hardest thing I've ever been through in my life, and man, what a blessed life I've had. This is the hardest thing I have to go through. I asked, what do I need in this season to 6 months from now emerge from it a stronger version of myself? And I asked the question against the lens of my mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and relational health. And for each of those 5 dimensions of health, tried to create a list of 1 to 3 things. For most part, I made 3 things per dimension of health, of what I need in this season to not just get through it, but actually emerge from it stronger because of having tried a new therapy or pushed myself physically or changed the way that I'm interacting with God or the way I'm interacting with therapists or the way that I'm interacting with friends.
Yeah.
Inside of the physical health space, the thing that I needed in that season, this season, was to be pushing myself towards something that was physically more challenging than I believed myself to be capable of, so that in pursuing that goal and achieving that goal, I could remind myself of my capacity to handle any hard thing, either in my physical space or in my mental space, my emotional space, whatever it might be. And so I, having just finished my first marathon, started training immediately for a half Ironman. I went from running, 60 miles or so a month to having crossed 200 miles that first month coming through the divorce. And for me, moving my body and pushing myself to run further distances and trying to do something where I don't know how to swim well and I've never had a road bike in a half Ironman, all of that work on the road, on the bike, in the pool, it was this very beautiful combination of church and therapy. Because when you're in that space, running, I was for the first couple months, I was running 12, 13 miles a day.
It's a lot of miles.
Well, so that's a decent amount of miles, but it's also a decent amount of time.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I wasn't running with music necessarily. I was running and speaking into my phone, like bringing the thoughts from my consciousness into the present, so that I could understand what am I feeling and why am I feeling this? And what do these feelings mean, or what do these thoughts mean? And just as a product of how to try and process something that I had never experienced, and the pain and the grief and the whatever else, it was awesome. Now, it was hard, just because I'd created a vehicle to try and create some catharsis for working through it. That didn't make it necessarily easier, but
you've got to process part of those emotions and let those emotions have the time that they need to surface and to be recognized and to play out their time span.
Oh, for sure. I mean, what's interesting is if there's a a change, a pivot, a departure from past, rather than trying to, turn on my music that would change the mood that I was in. I really, for the first couple months, just tried to give myself permission to sit in the feeling that I was experiencing and not try and like send it away.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you're experiencing negative emotions, it's a hard practice to commit to, because everyone, as a part of your humanity, wants to not necessarily feel bad, wants to not feel alone, feel whatever. But there was something that was just okay about sitting on my back patio and welcoming sadness or welcoming despair or welcoming whatever, and just sitting in it, because it being present and me not sending it away allowed me to process it in a way that actually afforded it the ability to leave on its own after we'd spent the kind of time that was necessary to actually understand why it was there and what might be some of the different ways to work through it.
You recognize, or is it something that you look back on? So I lost my first husband 15 years ago. He passed away as a result of melanoma cancer. And one of the things that I found really hard to start with was the loneliness. So going to bed at night was my hardest time. But then also recognizing when it was time to not wear my wedding ring again, like to stop wearing my wedding ring. So I don't think I did that part very well. Like, have you seen a point, or can you look back now, or it might be too close to the fact now for you at the moment, but do you think there'll be a point in time where you go, actually, not that the book is closed, but that chapter is closed?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part for me at the beginning was having an ability to conjure the imagination for what next looked like,
Because that
because of
mind at all, because you were imagining being married for the rest of your life.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't contemplated being divorced one time in 16 years. And then it was a conversation that we had, and it was in it being something I hadn't considered. It was hard. It was just hard for me to conjure the imagination. And so I found myself with this blank piece of paper where the future was now something that I was fundamentally and fully in charge of. Go ahead, Dave, write down literally anything that you want when it comes to what is next. And that is both exhilarating and terrifying.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I had to do was really address what was making me afraid, what was scaring me about filling out that blank piece of paper, so that I could understand if those fears were real or imagined, if there was a way to, in understanding the real fear, create something that would help inoculate me in some ways from it being something that would actually keep me from moving forward. So I had to make a list of all the things that I was afraid of. And I made this list 46 things long, lots of things to be afraid of. And I tried to, in understanding each of them, identify, were these real or not? And if they weren't real, could I please now dismiss them? They're no longer a thing I have to be afraid of. And if they were real, what could I do in my habits and routines? What could I do in my circle? What could I do in my connection to God? What could I do in whatever it might be to prepare myself to walk toward those things that I was frightened of anyway? Because I got to go do it anyway. Like, I got to go do it. It's not like just because I'm afraid doesn't mean that I'm not going to go have a future. Of course, I'm going to go have a future. Yeah. But by identifying what those things were, in a beautiful way, it allowed me to start to actually conjure an imagination that was compromised before. And once I was able to start painting this picture of where I thought I was going and who I was hoping to become, that vision then was informing what I need in this season, right? Like, what are the things I need in terms of habits and routines? What are the things I need in terms of community and therapy? What are the things I need in terms of regular conversation with God? What are the things, right? And so that was important. And once I got into a rhythm, the beginning, like, I'm sorry for your loss, but the beginning is hard. It's a nonlinear process where you can have 2 good days followed by 2 bad ones, then 3 good days followed by 2 bad ones. And you just hope that over the long arc of time, that grief inevitably becomes something that you learn to live with and become more comfortable with until you can see the other side. Well, after, it's been 7 months now, like after time has gone by, man, I have seen things through a completely different lens that's only afforded because of the passage of time. And some of the beautiful, unexpected surprises that have shown up in relationships, in this closeness that I feel to God, and the breakthroughs I've had for how I'm thinking about my own personal development and growth, the work that I'm doing that is now me on my own. Like I gotta go prove that I can do this stuff that I was doing previously in partnership by myself.
Yeah.
But all of those things happening over this course of time is, I think, again, changed the way that I think about most of it. Doesn't mean that there still aren't hard days. There's just way fewer hard days now than there were before. And I'm unbelievably more connected now, 7 months in, to gratitude for every single thing that will come, in part because of a divorce that I didn't expect and probably wouldn't have ever opted for. I think there's going to be some great things that come for both of us because of this, thing that will be a new kind of family that we have, and the opportunity for each of us to go do and be as individuals without some of the stuff that wasn't working as well in our relationship as a part of our story. So I think it's just, it's time more than anything, but time has definitely created a completely different set of optics that afford a lot greater degree of hope.
What do you think? So one of the things that I messaged you about was, and this is talking about me as a woman, and from my circle of friends and the way I've grown up, I don't think I afford men enough time for emotional space. So one of my questions to you was, how can women hold space for men's emotion when traditionally in my world, women don't do that well? Like you spoke about one day, I think you posted that you sat and cried for 2 days. So you weren't on social media because you just had 2 days of just straight crying. And for me, that was heartwarming because like I've not seen a man say that on social media before. So I think like that's an awesome thing for you to be able to do. And obviously you've done a lot of growth, like you said, to be able to get to that point. But are there ways that you see that women can hold more space for men's emotions?
Oh man, it's a good question. And I don't know that I have a great answer, because the reality is anyone, whether you're a man or a woman, you have to find a way to become comfortable with yourself representing the emotion that you are experiencing. Getting permission from or having an invitation from someone is nice, but it starts with you becoming comfortable enough to own your struggle and become vulnerable enough. I mean, the headline is struggle thrives in the dark, right? And so if you are in any way struggling or experiencing something that is holding you down or keeping you back, the best way to let it thrive and fester and debilitate you is to not talk about it. Yeah. And the thing that the society and gender norms and rules and masculinity have beaten into people over the course of generations is that real men don't, or tough guys don't. And that comes at the expense of someone who's struggling, who happens to be a man, from actually being able to get the kind of hope and help that they need, and probably keeps them feeling very alone in their feelings. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I was super uncomfortable representing and recognizing the things that I was struggling with. And it was only after I did so that I felt not alone, because the things I was going through were very, very normal. Everyone was experiencing something similar to the things that I was experiencing. And in representing the things I was struggling with, I was connected with other people who could see themselves in my story, in their having that connection, the tools that worked for them. And so now, as I was interested in understanding a podcast or a book or a course or whatever that might actually continue my journey through this experience of my struggle to a place where I was more whole and healed, I, because of my willingness to represent it, actually got the kind of help and tools that I needed. Well, that's a thing that until someone, whether you're a man or a woman, recognizes that, man, shame has no place here, there's no pride here, just acknowledge the truth of your experience that might connect you with someone else who's going through the same thing. It'll make you feel less alone, but it'll also hopefully connect you with someone who can afford you some kind of a resource to help you on your journey. And that's, man, it's been so true for me. I don't know, but back to your original question, I'm not sure that there's like a single thing that could be said outside of trying to just approach open-endedly. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Is there any kind of help that I could afford you or provide you? Normalizing, feeling emotional or having emotions, because it is normal. It's not a sign of weakness or an indictment of not being whole to feel or experience things whatsoever. I mean, mental health generally, it's a crisis that affects everyone, but mental health is even more acutely a problem inside of spaces where you don't feel like you're allowed to have a struggle with mental health. And so there's just a lot of work that's required for all of us to normalize how important it is to prioritize mental health, but also how normal it is to feel the things that we feel and talk about it when it shows up, so that we don't, in the dark, allow it to fester and grow.
I think one of the things that I'm just starting to put together with you is that you get just as much from the feedback that you get from people in social media as you do as you're giving. So you're not giving necessarily for any other reason than to connect with people, not to make a sale, nothing to do with your ego, but you are, would you say that's true, that you get back just as much as you give to people?
I mean, I definitely get back as much as I give. I wouldn't say, because I am a human, I think we all are motivated in some respects by ego, so that maybe some of what inevitably ends up coming back is satisfying something on an ego level. But the pursuit, the decision to leave a more conventional work structure was born out of an interest in a desire for fulfillment. And fulfillment for me became this pursuit of connecting and having impact with people in a way that would make it feel like the things that I was doing and exploiting the gifts that I was given was actually having an effect on someone else believing in themselves because of my belief in myself, or whatever it might end up being. And so, to anyone who's listening and thinks, oh man, you've got it all together. I do not have it all together. I mean, like, part of, if there's a thing that I have to continually work through on my side, I have this ambition to be a coach. I have this ambition to be an author. I have this ambition to be a quote unquote thought leader, which those words in and of themselves are ridiculous, because in some respects, there is something inside of our minds that convinces us that we have to establish expertise or mastery before we are able to be a teacher or a coach or a thought leader. And I am, what's that?
You're an author already, but that's my perception of what an author should be.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, but I'm speaking it out loud. This is much like a page out of my own therapy, right? My qualifications for being a coach or a teacher or a quote unquote thought leader are in part this willingness for me to recognize that I am, like you, the person who may in fact be a student on a journey to continue to learn from my failures and reframe the way that I think about the obstacles in my life in a way that doesn't disregard that they exist, in a way that doesn't diminish the fact that I'm still working through a whole bunch of stuff on this end, but just doing it in a way that's maybe a little more transparent and acknowledges a little more readily that I don't have it all together. I'm gonna keep on trying to get closer to together, but I may never get to together. And that's an okay thing, because we're all on this never-ending journey for becoming, and that becoming journey is something that hopefully will just never, ever end.
What do you think, or do you believe in soul? And if you do, what do you think your soul purpose is? And has that changed over especially the course of the last year? Because I know you've spoken in the book, your first book, about what your transition from being in Disney and being in that corporate world over into Hollis, what Hollis Company was, and how you have been through a really big growth in the last couple of years when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I am still figuring it out. I'd love to tell you that, like, man, I got my finger on it and it's done. The thing I'm writing in real time is this like mandate that exists for us to leave the place that we are in, the suffering that we know, the stuck that we are experiencing, for the peril, the fear, the unknown that exists outside the harbor. And I'm writing it as much for myself as I am for anyone who will inevitably end up reading it, because I, 3 years ago, left this conventional job for this unconventional entrepreneurial life, left a suit and tie for speaking into a podcast microphone, writing on pages of books, and talking on the internet. And it's been super jarring and challenging from an identity standpoint, but is me getting a step closer to feeling like I am actually doing what I've been placed on this planet to do. But as I'm in the midst again of writing what ends up coming out next year, I am writing in real time big, huge existential questions about what God specifically designed me to do, right? Like, why have I been given, why have you, listener, been given the exact set of skills, the exact passions, the exact opportunity to be light in this world that you have been afforded? Because the more that I can zero in on it, the more that I will have that trail of breadcrumbs lead to how I might best bring those gifts to bear. And I feel like I'm getting closer every day, but I do, again, I think this is going to be one of those things where you have to continue to do this exercise all the time, because you are continually becoming a different person. The person I am at 45 today, different than 40, different than 35, which means that the person I'll be at 50 and 55 and 60, different person.
Different person, yeah.
Yeah. And so I am on a perpetual exploration of why have I been given these gifts, and what's the very, very best exploitation of them? How can I find that sweet spot between where I have skill, what I have passion for, what brings light to the world, and how I might create some financial freedom for my family? Those things, where they intersect, that's where I tend to stay focused. Right now, I feel like I'm closer to the center in the work that I'm currently doing, even though, and maybe because it makes me feel super uncomfortable half the time to try and do the kind of stuff that I'm doing while I'm also experiencing life and trying to figure myself out and struggling inside of the new normal that exists in my world.
In your world, and then in the bigger world as well, because of
Yeah.
big change. So does how has your role changed since the separation and divorce within the Hollis company? So are you working separately, or are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm just finishing up my very last months of coaching. I was just helping out with the Rise run that happened, this virtual run that we were doing last weekend. But I'm transitioning away. We're going to do our own things. And it's this blank piece of paper where it is both exhilarating and also terrifying, because so much of the vision that was created in leaving Los Angeles and leaving that entertainment job that I had was built on this vision of what it would look like for us to work together inside this company for the rest of time. And while I'll be cheerleader number one for everything that the Hollis company does. I believe so much in the mission and love the team. And obviously I will be a cheerleader of Rachel's for the rest of my life as a partner, but also as the parent of my kids. But we decided, hey, it's probably better for us to pursue what we end up doing professionally separately, so that we can actually have the kind of relationship we want as a family without being encumbered by trying to do things together professionally.
It's tangled in that still, because
It's exciting. It's also scary, but if it weren't, there probably wouldn't be as much growth. So good news for my want for growth. I'm going to find it. Even as I probably stumble and make some mistakes and have to learn a lot along the way.
I think that's the beauty about you, Dave. Where, or have you always had the faith that you've had in God?
I have. It's one of these things where, well, one, I grew up being raised inside of a Christian household, always a person who was a churchgoer, had a lot of the capital T truths of my faith as something that were handed to me, and have had to, in my relationship with God and the wrestling of what faith means, understand how much of what was taught to me inside of the denomination that I was raised and through the frame that my parents taught me, what are the things that I believe? And so I've always had my faith. I've always been someone who believed in God and prayed, but I will tell you, I've certainly had a closer relationship to God in the last 6 months than I probably had the previous 6 years. It's funny how hard times will in fact bring you closer to God. Maybe there's something to that. There's a verse, James 4:8, that's more or less like, come close to God and he'll come close to you. I have experienced that in these last, certainly these last 6 months, as I have been really, really intentional as a part of what do I need in this season. I need to carve out time and sit on a rock and have a conversation every day with my creator in a way that helps me appreciate that, hey, there are bigger forces at play, surrendering in some respects, the feeling that I have to carry all of this on my shoulders. As much as there are a lot of things about 2020 that are not ideal, a gift of 2020 for sure has been this clear recognition that control has always been an illusion. And in the recognition of control being an illusion, there's freedom in that. But there's also, I think, in that surrender to a higher power and surrender to, hey, can't change the past, certainly can't affect the future. How do you show up today? And so many of my prayers and my spiritual practice and most of the things that I focus on when it comes to my goals around all those dimensions of health are really about how can I be the very best version of myself today to try and get one step closer to this vision of who I'd hope to become, in part because of the tumultuous nature of the conditions that I find myself inside of. Thank you, conditions. I hate to have gratitude for the conditions, but thank you, conditions. You are actually producing the healthiest version of me, the most spiritually connected version of me, the most understanding of why I feel the things that I do. I mean, I'm in the best shape of my life. There's, there's a lot of good things that are coming. And sometimes, many of the times, they're coming in part because of the conditions inside of which they were forced to show up in.
Yeah. So where some people would not turn away from faith, but I know after my husband died, long before that, I grew up Catholic, and long before that, I had decided that the way that was presented to me and it wasn't for me. I didn't believe that the God that I trusted would have conditions that I was taught through the Catholic religion. So I am still in an exploration of what spirituality means to me and what God means to me. And where some people, I think, like after my husband had died, people would have expected me to blame God, like, why has this happened to me? You've done what I think is not the normal thing from what I can imagine. And you've gotten closer, whereas some people would go, well, why would God do that to me? Or why would God do that to me in my life? But for me, I would say, that's happened for me. Would you agree with that? Like, this 2020 has happened to us for a reason. Like, for me, it's been one of the best years of my life in terms of career and development and personal growth and what I've learned about myself. And I don't know that would have happened had we not had COVID and had we not been given the gifts that COVID has brought us in terms of having to be isolated and looking at the world from a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I made this very bold declaration at the beginning of the year that this was going to be my best year ever. 45 years in, saved it for 45, best year ever. I didn't appreciate at the time of the declaration that I was not in control of the conditions through which it might manifest. And I will tell you, certainly in the middle of the year, as I'm processing something I never thought I'd have to process in divorce, I was not as sure in those first, month, 2-month window that in fact, I could at the end of the year stand here and say it's the best year of my life. And yet time's a pretty amazing thing, right? If when I get to 75, 30 years from now, I'm asked, what are the most important, impactful, what is the best year of your life? I'm 100% certain that 2020 will be one of the years that I reference in terms of why I am the man that I am, why at the dinner that we're having to celebrate that birthday as they're raising glasses to recognize the kind of contribution that I've had on the planet. Dave, what were the years that were the most meaningful in having you show up in the last 30, 40, 75? 2020 is gonna be one of those years. And so I can appreciate it today in a way that I couldn't certainly in June or July or August, right? Because time passing, like, if someone that you love has passed away, time passing maybe has you seeing things through a little bit of a different lens. So too is the case here. But because of, again, the conditions inside of which this year between COVID and every other thing that was happening in the world and the fact that I was processing the transition of my marriage, it was one of these things of, okay, you can put your head in the sand and die, or you can fight to try and have something good come from something terrible. And I chose the latter because I still have my 4 kids. Still want to look myself in the mirror at night and look, feel good about the way that I showed up for myself. I am still interested in living the back half of my life. I got another half a life to go. I'm going for 90 at a minimum. So if I got 45 years left, goodness, I got a lot of time to go. We better make something great out of this. And so, that I find myself in the health that I am in, and the mindset that I'm in, and the learning that has come from it. Like, man, I've had more growth in 2020 than the last 10 years combined. What a blessing. I'm not saying I want to relive it, right? Like anyone who's gone through hard things, no one wants to relive it. But I had somebody send a note the other day asking if they thought 2021 was going to be better. And I thought, well, I think it will be easier. But again, at the end of our lives, when we're asked what years were the most important in reframing what we thought about what was important or not important at all, how we thought differently about all sorts of things, 2020 is going to be a year that stands out in a way that 2021 isn't. And so easier doesn't necessarily mean better. Of course, I'd hope for everyone to have easier conditions, but sometimes uneasy conditions are the things that produce the best fruit.
Totally. You've talked a little bit about wanting to work with teenage boys.
Yeah, I am working on the pitch is not completely done. It's an interesting thing because in my what should I do next, I tried to start with a set of core values. Then I went from core values to a conversation around what it is that I am primarily focused on inside of my identity. And the idea was, if you could say what you stand for and what you do, what you stand for hopefully creates some guardrails around spaces outside of which you would never veer from in whatever you decide to go do. So I made a list of the things that I value personally, and then I made a list of the things that I want to do, and again, wanted to make sure that those things would. One of the things that I wrote down is that I'm a parent. And inside of being a parent, the question of how do you leverage that as a core part of your identity in how you create tools or resources for an audience. And hey, I want to try and preempt my human beings that are young from having to ever have to buy the tools that I'm creating for adults once they're old. So the question was, is there a way to potentially infuse truth into boys 8 to 12, into children 3 to 5? And good news, there are publishing houses that are interested in trying to reach this kind of audience. So I have a children's book around my tea time with Noah concept called Tea Time with Daddy. It'll be a picture book for kids. But again, it's just like, hey, if you can get in the hands of a 3-year-old truths that they might connect to and believe in before they grow up, then maybe they don't have to unlearn the things that society teaches them. Same idea for boys 8 to 12. It was, hey, inside of mindset and confidence, are there some things that you might inoculate these human beings with that before the world comes and teaches them their ways, maybe affords them an ability to reach with a growth mindset or think through, some kind of confidence lens that changes the way that they approach problems existing or failure being bad or whatever it might be.
So is that in terms of coaching or a book or like?
Those will both be books, and then we'll see as the books are successful if they end up lending themselves to something that turns into a course or something like that. At this point, it's a book, but I don't know. I love coaching.
Yeah.
I also appreciate that we got to take baby steps to make sure that you can convince the 8, 10, 11-year-old kids to actually consume the thing that you are creating. So let's see if they'll read the book first.
Your face just lit up like 100 times when you started talking about that. So clearly that brings you joy.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the thing is, it's like, if I was able to create a resource that would fundamentally change the way that my own children approach showing up as good humans as they become adults, I would already be a winner. So if then it ends up translating into other kids, other people's families, having a resource that could change the way they think about coming into the world, even better.
That's awesome. What is one of the most challenging decisions you've had to make in following your soul purpose?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's challenging now as much as it was at the beginning. I gave so much weight to the worry of what other people were thinking that deciding to do something that worked against conventional thought or what people who had my position may have done really weighed on me. And leaving Disney when I did was a very, very difficult decision, only in that I knew I wanted to pursue something that might create a level of fulfillment that was different and afford me some kind of to impact people in a different kind of way. But people didn't leave my job. They didn't leave that title. They didn't leave that security financially. And I worried so much about what people thought. And then I got out of the job and realized nobody was actually thinking about me, right? Because, right, everyone is thinking about themselves. It's not a bad thing about them. It's just a condition of humanity. We all think about ourselves. Right. And so in a weird way, testing the hypothesis of, is everyone thinking about me, and having a resounding nope, they are not, has been a freedom that has really informed so much of how I've approached doing everything in the work that I do now. I say what's on my mind. I share pretty transparently and pretty vulnerably. I think it's part of why the tools that I'm creating work. And it comes with this recognition that, man, someone's probably not going to like it, and that's fine. It's totally okay. If they don't like something that I've created or have concerns with the direction that I'm going, it tends to often more be a reflection of their own insecurity or fear than it is about something that I'm necessarily saying. And so if you who are listening in any ways have been encumbered by the worry of what other people are thinking, number one, they are not thinking about you. But two, if they are, it is likely a reflection of something that they have insecurity for, maybe jealousy about. It brings to their consciousness that you are willing to pursue something in your life in a way that they are not willing to pursue it in their life. Let it go. It just is a complete waste of emotion.
I used to have this thing as a teenager, and I asked you that question because it makes me laugh about myself now. And not that I don't like the thought about going back and telling your 16-year-old self something, because if I was to go back and tap on my shoulder at 16, I would ignore that person anyway. So I was going to do what
That's
I wanted.
Right.
But when I was a 16-year-old teenager, I was walking through the shopping mall at one point, and I thought I saw, in a reflection of myself, I thought I could see my underwear through my tracksuit pants. And I was devastated, because I've been wearing these tracksuit pants, and I thought that everyone in the shopping mall, I'd been there for a couple of hours, had seen this. And it worried me, and I wouldn't wear those tracksuit pants after that. But it wasn't until a lot longer later that I realized that everybody was thinking the same thing, not necessarily about their underwear, but everyone's so wrapped up in themselves, worrying about what other people will think of them, that they don't have time or energy to think about you.
No, not at all. No one's thinking about it. They are worried about their own underwear.
They are worried about their own underwear, hopefully. What do you want people to take away from this podcast? Like, what would you like them to remember, or what would you like the last thought of them to have from this?
Well, everything I'm working on right now is really centered around this idea that you have to choose to leave the dock, the harbor of familiarity, of certainty, of comfort for the opportunity that sits out past the jetty in the choppy waters. That is where you will find growth. It's where you're going to find fulfillment. It's where it's going to be scary and challenging and probably triggering in a whole host of ways. But those triggers, that fear, battling it and learning as you are in the midst of figuring out how to even steer the ship inside those waves, that's how you will grow and become the next version of yourself. And there's a lot of suffering that's happening in real time. And as a human condition, I think we tend to choose to stay inside of familiar spaces, and a lot of times stay inside of familiar suffering, because we know what to expect in the suffering that we are going through and are afraid of what's possible on the other side of that jetty because of it being unknown or unfamiliar. And I just would encourage anyone who feels stuck or struggling that it is going to be triggering and challenging and hard, but that is where your freedom sits. That's where your fulfillment sits. That's where your growth ends up sitting. Leave the struggle that you know, leave the suffering that you know, leave the familiar, and push yourself into something new for the opportunity to, inside of that new, end up becoming who you were put on this planet to be. I mean, self-actualization, actually living into the potential that we have all been given an opportunity for by our Creator. That is the top of Maslow's pyramid. That's the top of Everest. And that is a thing that everyone has an opportunity to reach for. as long as they're willing to go scared into unknown spaces and learn in the midst of falling down and failure and publicly potentially humiliating themselves, but because of their willingness to go out there and do it, get a whole bunch of unbelievable intel on what works and how to apply what works to becoming a better, more evolved version of yourself. Go out. It's time to leave the harbor, people. Come on.
Show me a tattoo now, because this is going.
I mean, come on. I got the tattoo here. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for. The next book is called "That's Not What Ships Are Built For."
Oh,
And
wow.
so I'm all about this. Like, all right, let's acknowledge that we were created for a purpose, and that purpose is not to stay docked to this station of suffering, but to push ourselves out into the water. That's where we're going to grow. That's where we become. That's where we're going to fully actualize the person that we were put on this planet to be by our creator.
Show you my tattoo as well. Can you see that?
Oh, I love it.
Shine Like It Does.
Shine Like It Does.
So, do you know the band In Excess?
Uh-huh.
So that's one of their songs, Shine Like It Does.
I love it.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to say to you was, I love your, I don't know whether this is your quote, but one that I used a couple of weeks ago after, actually, it was 2 weeks ago when I was doing my life-saving course. So like you, I didn't know how to swim up until this time last year. So I taught myself how to swim. And my listeners will have heard that story, but I was scared of water. I'm not scared of water. I was scared of fish, and still am a little bit scared of fish in the water, but decided to become a surf coach. So I needed to learn how to swim. But did that about 2 weeks ago, had to do a qualification called the lifeguard, to become a lifeguard, an ocean lifeguard, basically, because I needed that qualification to work where I'm working. And you quoted on that particular day on one of your stories, your struggle is a reflection of your humanity. Is that yours, or is that someone else's?
I said it. I don't think I took it from anybody, but it is a reflection of your humanity. I mean, it's just part and parcel with being human is being someone who's going to struggle every single day. And the faster you're able to become comfortable sharing it, like we were talking about earlier, the more that it connects you to everyone else who's breathing, because I don't care who they are. I don't care how accomplished they seem, how good a writer they are, how smooth they are on camera. Everybody struggles, everybody. And so if we can normalize that struggle is just a reflection of humanity, it will give you permission to go into spaces where you're going to struggle, because it's just a part of what it means to be alive. So embrace it, get out in that water, learn how to swim, whatever it ends up being. I don't personally yet know how to swim in the ocean, but I have to figure it out because it's a part of a dang race. I got to swim more than 2 miles. So let's go.
Very last question. How many pancakes can you eat in one sitting? Because I think that was one of the things that I asked you in the questions that I asked you.
How many pancakes can I eat in one sitting? I wouldn't touch a pancake. What do you speak of? No, I'm kidding. I'll touch a pancake. I think I could have 6, maybe. I'm tall. I'm 6'4". I'm a very big human being. So I think I could. I'd be sick immediately because I've been on a crazy nutrition plan that is all about exactly knowing the number of macros that are going into my body so that I can become a cyborg for this Iron Man. But for you, I'd have 6. I'd have 6 pancakes and then pass out.
I'd make them gluten-free, so I'm healthy as well. So all organic.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with me today, Dave. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad that we got to do this. Thank you for being so persistent in your request. I'm glad that it worked out and it was a very fun conversation. So thank you.
Tell that story, or you want me to tell that story quickly?
Oh, I'll tell the story. So if there was a symbol of persistence, it is our host here, because every single day for 30 consecutive days, Tanya here sent me a direct message to my Instagram, and I saw it maybe like 4 days in, and then I was like, well, I'm not going to break this. I'd like to see her actually get all the way to the 30th day. Every day for 30 days, she sent a different reason why I ought to be a guest on this podcast. And on the 30th day, I sent a note and said, hey, here's my email. Let's set it up. So to anyone who's listening, persistence is absolutely a thing that has got value. Good work, Tanya, on going for it and sticking with it.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you very much.